like many, I guess I first came across you watching your cheery and I suppose refreshingly unorthodox videos and commentary on X, and I've since seen people really drawn to your confidence and the spring in your step, and like even your charismatic smile just seems to stand in contrast with the difficulties that surround modern Western life. And your positivity seems to me to be wrapped up nicely in your bio, where you quite elegantly say you're a man living to his own design. Now, that statement really hit me. It actually reminded me a bit of a line in Ayn Rand's famous novel Atlas Shrugged, which goes, "Every man builds his world in his own image. He has the power to choose, but no power to escape necessity of choice." Now, in my mind, Rand would have known something about choice, having lived through the Bolshevik Revolution, and she was actually just 20 when she managed to get permission from the Soviet authorities to visit relatives in Chicago. Of course, she lied and told them that the trip was to learn filmmaking to help build the Soviet film industry, and she had no intention of returning. She found purpose and success in the US after escaping the clutches of communism. And I think it's safe to say that she was then very much a woman living to her own design as well. So it seems like there's really something important about that simple concept of navigating your own destiny. And I'm wondering, how important do you think it is to have the choice to build a life of your own design? And what does that mean for you?
Well, thanks, Paul, for that introduction. I'm glad my positivity comes through. I mean, there's so many problems in the world, in the country, in the nation that we face. You've got to know that at the end of each night, you're going to be in your own bed. So that should at least give everyone a bit of comfort, even if the days are hard. But yeah, look, every man would love to build the world, build their country, build their lives in the way of which, or build it in their own design. But unfortunately, when the government tells you how you are to design things and regulate, you're not given those opportunities. And I've seen a common theme online. A lot of people commenting on how modern architecture has taken all the passion out of our cities, out of our lives. But yeah, look, that is the way I've used to describe myself, a man living life to his own design, because I did very well at school. I loved school, to be honest with you. But after that, I dropped out of uni and taught myself everything I know by finding people who had what I wanted, by finding people who were smarter than me, and using the internet. Um, Really, I'll say the internet has been, it's incredible, the power that it gives all of us to answer any question, and that's what's really allowed me to go forth and build a life of my own design, working in the city to then returning to the farm and working from my laptop. This was what I wanted to create for myself, and I managed to do that by quite a young age, which I'm grateful for. And I think that Australia as a whole, which is what we want to get into, should really look to living a life of its own design, of moving forward independently, with a focus on the people within our borders. Charity starts at home, and when we have the potential to do that, I really think that the future, well, would give everybody the reason to be waking up optimistic and full of positivity.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like it almost seems strange to me that we have to discuss the importance of having sovereignty over your own life and decisions. Yet here we are, and yeah, your story is quite amazing, and I find it's particularly pertinent at the moment. Because as you said, you did drop out of uni, and let's get into this, possibly into the institutional sides of things. So university, getting a university degree, and in years past, maybe even decades past, was the thing you needed to do to progress yourself. But increasingly, I think that's maybe not the best approach, for ideological reasons, for financial reasons, for all manner of reasons. And like you said, you taught yourself everything you know by listening to other people who've done what you wanted to achieve and modeling them. And then obviously the internet came along, and you've got the world in your pocket, at least for now. And that's one of the things that is severely under threat at the moment. So yeah, Australia living a life of its own design. Let's go there now. Brace yourself, Lachlan. This might be a big question, but let's see where it leads. So I've named this space Australia on the Brink, and I've done that with some degree of intention. So I walked past one of Brisbane's tent cities last week, Musgrave Park, actually, in the heart of South Bank. So we got employed people living in tents in our major cities. And it really got me thinking that it feels a bit like we're in a war. So for a long time now, you know, our industry, our manufacturing's been hollowed out. Clearly, people have no savings. Families are fractured. The food we eat is far from nutritious, and as I said, you know, we've got people living in cars and tents, even though they're employed. And you know, I've been wondering whether any of these things are much different to what you'd see after a bombing campaign and a traditional war. That they seem to be quite correlated. And obviously, thankfully, there aren't bombs falling from the sky here. Our difficulties seem to stem from something else, and I think maybe the cumulative actions of our institutions might be a good place to start pointing the fingers. You know, from the educational system to the power industry. There's so many institutions that we accept here in our lives, maybe just because they've always been there or they've worked for our parents and have perhaps served us before. But am I wrong in saying they don't seem to be serving us anymore? There seems to be a lot that's broken. And as our society evolves, it makes sense that our institutions need to also evolve. But uh, are we past the point of tinkering? I think we need an entirely fresh approach. How do you see the institutional and kind of government landscape in Australia at the moment? And what could it look like in the future with a greater libertarian presence in politics?
Well, the quick summary answer is, you know, the system is broken. If it was going to be rebuilt, you know, refurbished, we would have already done it by now. You know, we've had the major political parties each have trying their hand at it, and it just continues to degrade further and further. So the system's broken. I don't think that we need to change the people in charge, like just changing those in charge of the ABC. I think we need pressure and competition returned to our society in order for things to evolve and actually compete in order to give it the best outcomes. Because the market is really the friendliest form of competition that drives evolution, that drives progress. When the government is just taking from one and giving to another and maintain and just recycles the money in that form, there's no need to evolve. And I think really we're at a time that we can have the conversations like this because, as you were talking, the institutions, the universities, those systems are failing us now and are not preparing us for when we enter the workforce. And I mean, it's pretty commonly, like I knew this going back 10 years ago, that what we are learning in the universities, what we are learning at school, by the time we leave, it is probably not unrealistic to say about 5 years outdated, because the bureaucracy that updates these processes and the curriculum, it's slow moving. It can't keep up with the rate of innovation that we're undergoing. And we're seeing now with truly the advent of AI, so many white collar jobs that are probably going to become redundant and even in the medical industry, you know, with what machines, with the data that machines can take from our blood, our saliva, and so forth. It's phenomenal what they can put together. So we're moving into a really a new industrial revolution, a new level of automation, and we're going to find some real struggles. But the problem is, without having competition, well, we're not going to evolve. We're not going to be finding new solutions. Um, we are in a period of stagnation, and that is a result of our mixed economy, our socialist economy, of a government that believes that they can regulate us into prosperity, of which this is definitely the mindset of the major parties. But I think, you know, when we look at all together what we're facing as a whole right now, when we look at the fact that our manufacturing is, we're gutted of manufacturing, we can't afford the electricity prices, we have record rates immigration to sustain the bubble, the property markets, and the economy as it is. But yet we are in a per capita recession. We have major technological addictions in the youth, which has been a very hot subject now. Children growing up on their iPads, not learning how to interact with society and read human emotions. And just a general lack of purpose in life, lack of direction, lack of community. All of which these are not these problems have a solution. You know, these aren't necessarily new problems, but I think they all come from us moving in a direction of which is anti-human. When we move in a direction that is big government, that is letting authority control you through whether that's coercion or force because we don't have a choice, well, it's anti-human. We need to be moving back in a direction that is pro-human, that is pro-freedom, pro-individual, taking responsibility, and that looks to people engaging with one another to create the strength. And that's really where I want to kind of get us to, is that we used to have something called friendly societies. All right. And now John Humphreys gave a speech of this in CPAC just last weekend, which I was lucky enough to listen to. We never used to have the government provide us with the services of welfare, education, but yet we always had a system that provided that. And that was usually through the church and the community. And the family. There's a reason that these institutions have remained steadfast and foundational to our society to get us to this point. It's just that I think it was within 1 to 2 years of the British government, the Data for Britain, of the Britain introducing the creation, the foundations of what is the welfare state. Well, within 1 to 2 years, 50%, sorry, yeah, all friendly societies fell apart, right? Yet just prior to that, about 50% of the population were receiving pensions, healthcare, and just general support from either their church, their community, or their family.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack. Sorry, mate, had you finished?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So there's just so much to unpack there. You've really laid out a great synopsis of where we are and how we've got there. Certainly, you speak to the damage of the welfare state, and boy, are we really seeing that play out in real time now. And like you said, that many heads to this hydra. We've both mentioned the manufacturing, the immigration issue, the power prices. Power in particular is essential for a modern economy. The tech addictions in the youth is another astute observation. I feel a little bit like, where do we start? Now, you did mention um, the church and the family in particular as being pillars of how things were. But I'd be curious as to where you see the low-hanging fruit is here, because I try to be quite optimistic about things, but I do confess that at times it does seem like a ship that's hard to turn. Could you speak a little bit to maybe some of the practical ways that we could start chipping away at what is seemingly a set of fairly entrenched problems at this stage?
Yeah. So, well, right now, for a modern economy to succeed, what are the four, generally, or maybe five, non-negotiables? You need land, you need water, food, and you need electricity, and probably now telecommunications as well. So, low-hanging fruit. The first thing I think, as a nation, we really have to hammer home and solve is our energy crisis. And the solution is just nuclear. Turn back on the coal fire stations, turn back on the gas, let them support us while we make the transition to nuclear, which will be a couple of years, but is inevitably the only option for the long term. Um, I forget about the scale, but the more developed, the more advanced the civilization, the more energy it consumes. And if we want to do things in the best way for the environment, then we've got to do them on our own shores. We cannot be just offloading the waste and the destruction to these other countries. We need to be doing it here first, because we'll do it right. We'll take care of our land. So the low-hanging fruit is energy. Once we can bring down manufacturing costs, manufacturing can return to the country. I see that as the number one priority. And I think it needs to be done through a private-public a partnership. If we let the government run this entirely by themselves, not only is it going to take twice as long as they tell us, it will cost 3 times as much. So I would really just love to see a number of different companies, present their business plan on how we can get this done. Really, The only negative thing that they can do to us is turn off the power if we made enemies with the nation that was investing here to do that. If we really had to, we can always take control and turn it back on. And really, the bigger problem with having private companies working on the energy infrastructure is the data that's transmitted through the power lines now. But all that can be figured out. First of all, we just need the cheap electricity ASAP. After that, it really comes to the allocation of resources. And so if we can get the money handed more directly to the smaller forms of government, aka the family, which is a form of government, the smallest form of government, I think just there we would see a lot more positive outcomes. For example, childcare. Childcare subsidies should be given to the family, to the mum and dad, because if they don't need childcare, then they can use that money for their own bills and they can allocate those resources as they determine best fit. But if they do need childcare services, well, let the free market provide the childcare options and let the families allocate that money to who gives them the best service. I think that a bigger issue that we face, because we are incredibly rich, is just the allocation of our resources is really poorly managed and filters through too many hands before it gets to where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and I love how you've got a go-to low-hanging fruit issue that's kind of a bit of a central pillar from which many other things, if not solved, become much easier to solve, at least. And certainly it blows my mind the extent to which we've got a nuclear debate in this country. It just seems like reason is not a commonly spoken language anymore, but except for in the context of this space. So that's wonderful. And the other thing, I think, one of those peripheral benefits that you get from fixing or addressing the energy problem, particularly with nuclear and lifting a long-standing ban, is it opens up an industry that people can then sink their teeth in. So you spoke too about the disillusioned youth, or the people coming into the age of tertiary education now have the opportunity to work in a nuclear industry that they didn't before, and provide a sense of purpose where that otherwise wouldn't be the case. So yeah, lots of peripheral benefits there. Now you spoke a lot about the family. Now this is one of my favorite topics, as I mentioned in the introduction, and I wanted to talk about the importance of the family, because as obvious as it may seem to many, we just are living in a time where the obvious needs to be reiterated. So as you said, I too see the family unit akin to something like the atomic level of governance. And a family is an example of a structure that has different areas of specialization and responsibility. Usually the fathers are happy when they're productive. I know that's the case for me. When I work productively, I get a boost that I just can't mimic anywhere else. And when I'm engaged in providing a household and opportunities and protection for my family, that brings satisfaction to me. And equally, mothers are extremely good at transmitting the cultural values to children that we need to perpetuate our society relationally, and at home they provide countless benefits that make a household a place you actually want to be in. My wife and I often remark that neither of us could really do what the other one does, and it brings a sense of appreciation and admiration for the other. So it seems to be when you get the family right, it almost automatically scales to the national level, which I think is what you're alluding to there. So, I mean, you mentioned the childcare subsidies there, and that's a great idea, putting more, I guess, decisions in the hands of the family. But since the family seems to be really one of the bedrock pillars of a society, how else can we help to fix the family unit? There seems to be a lot wrong with it. Fathers are missing. Where do we start unraveling that one, or continue to unravel that one? Do you have any ideas there?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the family is really where we're struggling right now. I mean, a couple of places to start here, but I always think to myself, what do we have at the end of our lives? We have nothing but our experiences to hopefully share with our family. I mean, isn't the cliche the grandfather, grandmother there sharing their memories and their experiences with their grandchildren? And it used to be that and actually this is what I had. My grandparents were integral to my upbringing because my parents were busy, they had to work, and at times all I had was my grandparents. And that's how it was for pretty much the entirety of human history up until more recently, when we've started to put our grandparents into homes and let the state more so take care of them than ourselves. And so I'd say that so, again, it goes back to that, the foundation, family, church, community, that needs to somehow come back together or find reasons to re-engage. And I say church as well as someone who's not particularly religious, but it's just the societies that usually build around that provide support for one another. And I'm not naive to deny that. So Adam, look, clearly, I think one of the number one causes for divorce, right, is financial stress. So that directly connects to the financial crisis that we're struggling with. Okay, whether that's home prices, fuel prices, or food prices, it's all going to play into that. So the solutions there again, I really think the simplest thing is to just cut the fuel excise tax, even if it's only by half, because at least that way, remember, this is an enormous country. To get anywhere costs fuel, all right, which is probably one of our most consumed resources that should be our number one priority to get the price down on, because we all have to use it every day. All the food in the grocery stores have to take on board that cost. So if we can somehow just drop the cost of living, I think we'll see a lot more families at least feeling less stress. Because why does the government keep pumping in more money into childcare? Because in their minds, the way they see it is that we can't help people work less. They have to work more, right? Because things are so expensive. But we'll help them work more by offloading their children into the system, but into the government funded systems. It's the wrong priority. I see. I really would like to see costs lowered and that money put back into the family's pockets, so that those who do need the childcare services can pay for it. Those who don't can maybe spend it as they wish. So that can also go with fuels. With schools. So when it comes to education, let the families receive either vouchers or just the cash directly to the family in order for them to spend it as they wish. It can be allocated for educational needs, but as a family, I still think that there should be a discretion on how they spend that for educational needs. And so I see a lot of the solutions coming from bypassing certain levels of government which don't need to be there, or certain bureaucracies that don't need to be there, and let us return the decisions to the family and let us direct the funding directly to the family. And I think that's pretty libertarian in attitude because we want to empower the smallest form of government possible, decentralize the decision making, and let individuals, let families live a life of their own choices, of their own design in a way.
I love it. It certainly is libertarian values, isn't it? And as an engineer, I certainly appreciate the value of decentralization. Anyone in the kind of crypto space will see this as well. And I certainly see that's a model that can be applied very broadly across society. Now, this is one of the things I love about you. I ask these big overarching questions, and straight away you're able to cut through it and get into some nuts and bolts type answers. And that cutting the fuel excise tax, particularly in a large country, as you say, where the costs of fuel tangibly separate families. And if you're going to tackle divorce and other frictions in the household, certainly the mechanics of getting people together, making that cheaper, seems like a very practical approach. And I equally resonate with the idea of the vouchers or cash towards the family, and just bypassing the bureaucracies that cream a lot off the top. And from family we get the experiences that you say are so valuable in life. And I too have fond memories of my grandparents. Grandparents seem to be capable of instilling certain memories and values and experiences in children beyond what parents are capable of. So it's another tragedy that we see grandparents just chucked off in homes and treated like a burden. So But
And
yeah,
I
you
just add
yeah,
here.
sorry, but yeah.
I want to add quickly on the grandparents thing. It's unfortunately it's a real modern Western idea as well. More so, I think, in maybe America and Australia. Look, Asian cultures, and I speak, from experience with my Vietnamese friends. The children will stay at home until their early 30s to help save on costs, or I know they'll go and buy a home together, and the entire family themselves will work to pay off that mortgage. The family that's you know the family stays together, yet even myself and my family, once we turn adult at 18, at 17 myself, we leave the home, we go take on another car and a bunch of other additional expenses, and break apart that integral unit to helping ourselves, thrive. So I just wanted to sort of say it's a new phenomenon that's really just facing the West. When we look at a lot of Asian cultures and a lot of European cultures, they still stick together. I'm thinking of Italy, Spain. The family units there are very strong.
Actually, now you mentioned that, I too have connections and friends where that's the case, and yeah, it's normalized for them. There's not the need to duplicate everything, as you say. You go out and buy a second home and duplicate everything else, and end up eating alone. Ironically, hearing you talk, I'm struck with the thought that possibly finding the solutions is not the difficulty, or the main difficulty, at least. It's the bit you mentioned about bypassing certain bureaucracies. Now, if there's one thing I've learned about particularly national or federal governments, it's that they're in the business of preserving power, largely. And so it strikes me that there'll be a fair bit of resistance to implementing the types of things that you're proposing here. Well, what can you talk to in terms of ways to manage that resistance? Because having ideas that we want to try is one thing, but there needs to be some pragmatic or practical way of starting to push the needle in the other direction. So what sort of pushback do you expect with presenting and pushing for these ideas, and how do you think that's kind of best addressed over time?
Yeah, well, that's an issue that will be addressed over time. So you're right in saying yes. Those in the government, especially the bureaucracy who are not voted in, want nothing more than to preserve their comfortable positions, preserve their power. And so it really is, the people up against the state. And it is an information war. You talk about the fact that we're nearly in the war. We are. We genuinely are facing a form of tyranny, soft tyranny, that wants to keep us silent, that wants to, stop the sharing of ideas, and the freedom that we have by having these communications online is so empowering, because we are really the first generation to actually have this, which is allowing us to coordinate as never before. And so it comes back to the narrative war that we're really facing. And Craig Kelly made a post that I thought gave me chills. But the misinformation bill that we're up against, the greatest threat that we have faced was when the Japanese army was marching down the Dakota track. I think I might have pronounced that wrong, but yeah, this is the greatest threat since the Japanese Imperial Army. So that's a big statement. And really, to knock out this bureaucracy, we see it in Senate estimates, the discussions they have, and how they're happy to lie to your face. They're happy to misdirect and project and do everything but answer the question directly. And so I think that it's our ability to win the narrative in convincing people that they don't necessarily need the government to manage these aspects of their lives. If we change nothing, we still kept the same rates of tax, but we were able to convince people that, hey, wouldn't it be better if we gave you the money directly, in your pocket, rather than putting it into these different bureaucracies that then manage it themselves? If we could win the narrative in a way like that, which I think we actually really could, well, then we're going a long way in reducing the power of the bureaucrats. Because if we give people back their own money for them to spend in their own way in the private economy, well, that's going to go a long way in re-empowering certain communities, churches, and families. Yeah, that would be kind of how I approach. I think it really is us coming to the realization that we have to win a narrative. We have to win the hearts and minds of a nation to really, dig out the entrenched bureaucracy.
Oh boy, it's a perfect segue with the term hearts and minds, with winning a narrative for sure. But before we get onto that segue, yeah, it's sobering, isn't it? There's a temptation to stick your head in the sand or go watch Netflix or something when you're faced with the almost undeniable reality that we are in a genuinely, soft tyranny, or a type of war. And yeah, the lying to your face has just become quite normalized as well. And it's been a pretty rapid development. And maybe we need to return to some skin in the game, some accountability. And I think that's partly the outcome of winning the narrative. And the segue I was referring to before, as you were speaking there, is it reminded me of the Samuel Adams quote. I'm a big fan of the American founding fathers. I think not just for their wisdom alone, but in my mind, it gives me chills that wisdom was forged in the fire of experiencing the first-hand sting of tyranny, and I think the assessments of those that have been through periods like that, and I mentioned Ayn Rand as well earlier, never to return to Russia. These should be discarded at our great peril. So Samuel Adams famously said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." But times have moved on since the kind of people running around with muskets and fighting the redcoats, and it's got me wondering, what does that winning the narrative look like in your mind in 2024? Because I know you've been traveling a lot and talking a lot, particularly with the people of Queensland recently, and presumably you've seen what resonates with people and what connects. And I'm wondering, what's the best way of setting brushfires of freedom in the minds of men and women today? How can we most effectively convince people of what ultimately we think is good for everyone?
Good question, and I actually think that quote is excellent and still very close to the reality now. It only takes a small minority raising their voices and standing up against the establishment to create change. And look, the circumstances are all in our favor to rebuild the system in a more transparent, fair manner. I mean, I don't meet anyone who has, well, apart from the radicals who have a blind trust in the government. They know something went terribly wrong a couple of years ago. They know that nothing is improving as we know it, and so I really think, in the same way that the left have been incredibly bold in how they've looked to take power and rule over us, that we need to be very bold in going in the other direction, in telling people, and a few people have particularly liked when I've said it's all about you having choices to live your own life. They particularly like the word choices. And so, a word that we would never learn in school, but I really want to see become more commonly embodied is laissez-faire, a laissez-faire way of life, which, it's a French word that literally means allow to do. It's the idea that let people do as they choose. And that can be any aspect of society, whether that is your private property developments, where you want to eat, what you want to eat, where you want to send your children, to which school, on which bus, etc. And I was at a meet. I was at again. I was at CPAC all last weekend, and a conversation came up, and a gentleman said, the British who colonized, right, sort of Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, Canada, you know, they must have done something right because those places thrived. And we all know that Hong Kong and Singapore, they were incredibly prosperous, as was Australia. I actually don't know much about Canada, but I assume they were as well. And that is because they were a laissez-faire economy, in the truest sense of what we probably have seen, as was the United States when they were sort of just getting going and so forth. And we need to really understand that we have been trialing a system, a mixed economy system now for the last few decades, where the government regulates and interferes and tries to manage things and try and ensure that we all have more equal outcomes and the money is shared, the rich aren't accumulating too much wealth, etc. And yet the rich are accumulating all the wealth. We see the greatest now divide between the rich and poor that there has ever been. We're seeing industry struggle, individuals struggle, the family breaking down. And so I think that it's very clear the path that we're on is unsustainable. The mixed economy system, where we're trusting, unfortunately, bureaucrats who eventually are not going to be very smart people, manage things that they have no understanding about. And so life degrades. We get where we're at, and the welfare state is the ultimate authority in a way. We need to start helping people understand and take more independence and move in a laissez-faire direction.
And just hearing you talk there, it just reminded me that I love the simple approach to libertarianism as a concept, because we could have discussions and debates on all manner of topics, but there's just that underlying principle of empowering the individual and having choices. And it just seems friction free in a way. I haven't seen a parallel. I just love that approach.
And let me give you a bit more of an idea of this, because I am by no means educated and well versed enough to manage different aspects of society. And we've seen this as many collective forces have tried their best to create a from a centralized authority, collectivized society for equal outcomes, and it's always ended in disaster. And the clearest that I had a conversation at Brisbane Dialogues a couple of weeks ago now, and this was exactly my point. How can the government? It was about banning 16-year-olds from accessing social media. So first of all, okay, the government bans or puts on ID verification for Facebook and X and TikTok, for example. But they're completely, they don't have any idea that Roblox, I saw in the news 2 or 3 days after those discussions, that Roblox is a cesspit of pedophile activities. Yet Roblox is like Minecraft for those probably in their 20s and 30s. It is so popular with the younger generation, and it has its own chat service that I know my friends' young children are engaging with, and they absolutely love it. But there's no talk of that, right? The government just doesn't do things very well. They don't understand that probably a lot of boys, especially, are communicating on programs like Discord, not on Facebook. So there needs to be an education of the parents, right? Who is it that is living with the children who are suffering? Because what was undeniable is we have a major issue when it comes to technology and the addiction and the disconnection from real life. But how do we solve that? Okay, and I genuinely and I will vehemently stand against the government trying to ban under 16s, because remember, it's not the 16-year-olds who have to verify, it's the adults, it's me and you. So, and I think that just opens up a can of worms for digital ID and other systems of control. And so, yeah, libertarians understand, we don't necessarily, we genuinely don't know how to manage every aspect of society, but individuals left to their own devices, given the access of information that they need, which most of us could find it out ourselves, but sometimes the government can help with that. As long as they don't force it, right? Nothing safe and effective about last time. Individuals will find the reality, find the truth. Yeah, that's my little segue.
Yeah. Oh, I'm here nodding away in the background as I hear you talk, and that social media control as a function of age. I mean, people have rightly arced up about that, but viewing it with my engineering hat on, and actually, I've just come out of a 3-year period of writing a book on the case against digital ID, which is just coming out now, actually. So I'm well entrenched in the dangerous, that's the tip of the iceberg, the absolutely dangerous path we walk as a nation with just the centralized use of identity is a very powerful tool. And in fact, you mentioned what Craig Kelly mentioned there about the Kokoda Trail before. And it reminded me of a quote from Peter Garrett, actually, in the 80s. So he made a comment on the Australia card back then, which the nation firmly rejected. And he called the Australia card the greatest threat Australia has ever faced. We've had that in our history here, and people have been insightful enough to see that is the thin end of the wedge, and that digital identification in the centralized form of it, at least in the hands of the federal government, is all about resource and access control, conditional access, that is. So yeah, wow. Where do we go from there? Look, another thought that's popped up hearing you talk there about, you mentioned the education of parents and the fact that a lot of children, and I've spoken about this to you offline, that children are parented these days by tablets, not their parents. And look, part of that's education, I'm sure. Part of that's the fact that the parents are just struggling to keep the lights on. I get all of that, but I've got this idea about the presumption of government exclusion. I'd love to hear your take on this. So I wonder if we can address discussions by defaulting to the idea that the government should have nothing to do with it, much like we do with the presumption of innocence. The burden of proof is on those accusing someone of a crime, and if that accusation is not met to sufficient standards, then innocence prevails. And I just feel like there's a bit of a parallel there with the inclusion of government. Maybe we should say, well, government shouldn't be involved in anything, and the burden of proof is on those who wish to involve it, and they'd need to argue exceptions for that. What do you think about that? Is that a simple framework that could possibly help us navigate some of these issues?
I think in the long term, probably. I do think a minarchism, is the direction where we have an incredibly limited government. The government really just needs to protect the borders, ensuring we have a sensible, controlled, assimilation process for those who are coming here. Take care, help many, the military, obviously, for national security. But yeah, when see again, a lot of the issues that we're facing in this modern society, when it comes to the family, the unity of the nation, the stability, is because we have that lack of community, that lack of identity and association between individuals. The answer too easily now and too often is, hey, can the government take care of me or help in this regard? Like, we don't have any savings as an individual anymore. One of the reasons that the US was so potent and so powerful during World War II is that families in the US had a couple of months worth of savings available for them to leverage on. As individuals now, the majority live paycheck to paycheck. So we're in dire straits for sure.
Sorry, just jump on my mute button there. Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'd just like to say I'm super enjoying this conversation, but before I self-indulgently jump into another train of thought, I thought I might just open it up to Preston to see maybe if you've had an opportunity to scan some of the comments or questions, if there's something that might be relevant to pop into the discussion at the moment before I continue any further.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. And I'm going to ask everyone, if you do have a question about what we're talking about in this space, please post it in the bottom right corner in the comments section. I'll be reading out some of the best ones. But before I get into some audience questions, I've got a personal question for Lachlan. Lachlan, you were at CPAC this recent weekend, and I had a pretty amazing conversation with Kenelm Tonkin, Libertarian in South Australia, about the major differences between conservatives and libertarians. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the differences specifically between libertarians and conservatives when it comes to a lot of the topics we've been talking about tonight.
Yeah, terrific. So I'm glad you brought this up. That was a terrific space you did with Canelm. And I think he articulated my thoughts exactly. So look, Labor and Greens are socialists, communist parties. They're all about more and more taxation, and they want to make the decision on where your money is spent when it comes to the nation. Unfortunately, the Liberals, as Canal articulated, they're social democrats. Conservatism, to me, if someone were to say they're a conservative, well, they need to explain to me what that means in the context of our time, because that's a forever moving goalpost. And I would say that right now, the conservatives really don't stand for anything. What is there left to conserve? But and then I'll just add, and One Nation are more effect. You can imagine them as Argarian socialists. So they represent the bush, more of the farms, and they would like to take the money and redirect it to those communities, which, of course, that's probably a much better way to allocate funds right now, but you're still a socialist. And so what we need to be clear on is that politics is downstream of culture. If you want to reshape the government, the nation, that is the culture. That is how people identify. That is the celebrations that you're embodying. And I don't, I don't want politicians, because we've seen this now through this woke narrative of what it means when they try and control and direct the culture. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs that every time now I'm just watching I'm watching The Last of Us. Yes, The Last of Us series. And I'm sorry, I'll spoil it because it's important to say it's in an early episode, but they have a massive gay scene, two men. It was really, really well done. The whole scene, the relationship, the build up and the fall, it was genuinely, I thought, wow, this is pretty good. Problem is, because it's pushed on us from so many different sources now, it instantly does turn me off a bit. That's the reality. Like I just thought it was, again, trying to push a political narrative, a political agenda. So within the individuals, within societies, where we need to form the culture, form the attitudes, and express those beliefs and embodiments at events like CPAC, and the politicians will embody that, and and show that, because they should be representing the people. It's just that the conservatives, as they would still call themselves, are too quiet and shy, and they need to start being a lot more proud about the nation and what we've achieved.
Thank you, Lachlan. I want to go into some audience questions, and we have many audience questions, and I would encourage everyone who wants to ask something to leave a comment. One topic that we've been talking about a lot tonight, Lachlan, is family, and I know you're a bigger proponent of the traditional family, as am I. But I want to ask you how that fits into libertarianism. Should the government force or support only traditional families, or should people be able to make their own decisions as well? I think is the basis of one of the questions, and I'll maybe ask a few follow-ups to make sure I've covered that question fully.
Yeah. So reality is, I've been thinking about this, right? For society to continue, we need a woman and a man to procreate and have children. That is the reality to go forward. And so one way I was kind of thinking about this is, for example, if the government was to directly fund the families, okay, a family, mother and father, they could receive that cash because they are the lowest form of government, and they can decide as a form of government themselves where to allocate those funds. A lot of people have issue with that because, of course, what about singles? What about those who don't want to have a relationship and start a family, etc.? Well, perhaps in that circumstance, they should only be given vouchers, as they are just an individual. They're not a form of government. So vouchers, health vouchers, dental vouchers, education vouchers, which could be redeemed at, private or public services. Sorry, I'm not sure if I really, that's, but look,
that's right. Let me ask some follow-up questions. So, one big misconception I know that a lot of people have about the Libertarian Party is that they think libertarians want to cut out all public support. No one gets any help from the government. But that's the misconception, is that libertarians want to reduce wastage more than cut off all support. So one of the topics we talked about tonight, Lachlan, was how families are a support system, but not everyone has families to be their support system. How far should the government go to getting involved in supporting those people when they don't have a support system of their own, being their family?
Well, and this is, this is where we had a choice.
And also, sorry,
Yeah,
Lachlan,
you're right.
also, are there maybe any alternatives than the government getting involved? Maybe private organisations as well?
Yeah, well, that's what people don't really, none of us would remember because we're all too young, probably. But these friendly societies, as I mentioned in the beginning of this, 50% of the British society were taken care of with pensions, with medical care, job seeker payments, education payments, etc. All that's forms of welfare by the communities, by the churches, by private enterprise before the welfare state, the big government, started managing these aspects of society themselves. And then the flow and effect of that is then we've got now this lack of identity and this great lack of unity I see, and just ability for individuals of a community to come together and engage with one another. But what I'd say, look, it's mostly about just getting things working again, because here's an example that I heard about firsthand about the allocation of resources incentivizing the wrong outcome. So the job search providers, they're allocated X amount for every person who comes searching for a job. Problem is, and the way that this works at the moment, is that the longer that they retain job seekers, the higher the pay that they'll receive. And so I've had individuals tell me that the job search providers told them to decline jobs because if they just wait a few more days, the job search provider will clock into the higher bracket of subsidies. So that's where you're incentivizing individuals to purposely, hold back on offering certain jobs in order for them to get more money. That's where we've really failed. I think the government in a lot of areas is funding the wrong sort of outcomes or unintended outcomes. Everything needs to be performance and results orientated. As individuals who are taking on the positions should be based on their performance, not DEI.
Talking of DEI, maybe that's a good segue into the next question. There are many people, the Libertarian is maybe known as a right-leaning party, and I would say maybe it's a fair assessment to say you are more right-leaning, as am I. But my question is there a place for people from the left who might be disenfranchised within the Libertarian Party?
I mean, I'm not someone who hates on. Well, look, when you say the left, I'm not entirely sure what that even means, and even to say right. I mean, I just don't want the government trying to manage the aspects of society that we see right now. I really just want to live my own life on my farm with my family the way that I want, without having to struggle to make ends meet, which is because of an incompetent government that isn't improving anything. The roads. I travel from Brisbane back up to the Whitsundays quite regularly. The roadworks have never ended, nor do they ever seem to be making progress. The congestion in the city itself is just atrocious. The hospital wait times have not improved. We've got youth crime that is just now getting out of control. So there's something on both sides of that has failed us. Whether you're Labor, whether you're Liberal, I see them as very much the same. They're both working in favor of big corporations, and we are the ones funding them. It used to be, Labor, more the left wing, used to represent the workers. Liberals used to represent small business. Well, I see both of them as equally important, because we cannot have this country and society without them. So when it comes to the allocation of resources, let's just make it fair and flat. So that's the only way to achieve that is the government needs to stop prioritizing and subsidizing certain aspects of society. They need to get out, and when they're making taxes, they need to be flat and fair. And so even before joining the Libertarians, in my mind, I just wanted a flat, simple tax rate, whatever it might be. The Libertarians have decided 20%, no matter how much or how little you earn. I really think that fair, equal approach to everybody at all ends of society is what we need, because the rich are just as important as the poor. And if you tax the rich too much, they will leave the country. That's what a lot of people don't realize. Wealth will flee the country if we don't incentivize, a deregulated, prosperous environment. And there's examples of this all over the world.
I think one of the best ways I understood this question that I asked you was seeing a quadrant. There's a government quadrant. You can search for that on Google, and it kind of explained to me that libertarianism doesn't fall into the left versus right dichotomy. We simply don't fall into that. We fall into more so the government controlling us versus government leaving us alone dichotomy. And I think that was one of the best ways that I understood that question. It's not really a left or a right wing party. It's a party of, I think, what was that word you used a little bit earlier in the space, Lachlan? Let people do as they please, I believe it meant.
Yeah, laissez-faire. So,
Uh,
and that is, you're actually quite right here, because as I also said, politics is downstream of culture. So if we just have a government that is very fair and very minimal when it comes to our lives, then people as a society, as a culture, can argue and put together the unions and have the conversations with the businesses on what they need. The government really does these things inefficiently, and we could all do them before as individuals.
we are coming to an end of. My apologies, I think I was muted, but we are coming to an end of this space in the next 15 to 20 minutes. So I would encourage anybody to write their questions down in the comments section below. If I haven't seen it, tag me in it, because that way it'll come up as a notification and I'll be able to ask Lachlan what that question is. But Lachlan, I want to hear a little bit about what you're up to over. I know maybe there was an election coming soon that's maybe a little bit later now, but where are you at in your, I guess, candidacy for the election? What are you up to? What kind of things have you been doing, and what's your plans for the near future?
Yeah, well, we've got obviously the state elections this month, which, if you're on the Gold Coast or in Brisbane, please, if you've got the time, support our libertarian candidates down there. But myself personally, so I've just returned home from just over a month in Brisbane, which is my longest stay in a while, for a number of events that we had on. So now that I'm back home, I'll probably be putting together a few more videos. We do actually have a number of policies for the federal campaign that we have released. They are on our website. I can drop the link in the comments section here for us all. There is a policy on immigration, housing, taxes, energy, etc. So everyone can look at that. And coming into November, I'll be touring my way up to Port Douglas in the very northernmost part of Queensland, so through Cairns, Townsville, etc., with Jim, and then back down and back also towards Rocky. And that'll take up most of November, and then December, even a bit of January, will be pretty quiet because nobody wants to talk about politics over the Christmas holidays.
All right, one more question for you, Lachlan, before I hand back to Paul, because I think we may have got through all the audience questions. If I haven't seen yours, please tag me in it, and I will make sure to ask Lachlan. But I want to ask if people have kind of listened to this space tonight, Lachlan, and they maybe like what they're hearing. They say this guy sounds quite reasonable. I want to hear more from him. He's quite interesting. He maybe aligns with me in some areas. How can people maybe get in contact with you? Can people send you a message? Are you open to chatting about some things if people are interested in talking to you more?
Yeah, of course. So on my social media profiles, I'm pretty sure anybody can contact me at any time. So feel more than welcome to. I'm more than happy to have conversations on any subject. Again, I'll always say, I don't want to control anybody. I want to let individuals make their own decisions on how they live, and I think that's the way we need to go forward as a country. But yeah, my socials, I'm very contactable, and yeah, that's what I'll say there.
And I do want to, sorry, my microphone was muted once more. I do want to recommend people do send Lachlan a message, because that's the benefit of the Libertarian Party. They are the party who are accessible. They are the party who are coming onto these spaces, talking to us week after week. This is actually Paul's second space with a Libertarian politician. So I want to, just before I hand back to Paul, I want to say a huge thank you to him for hosting you, Lachlan. A huge thank you to you for coming on this space. And I know you send Lachlan a message. We don't always talk about politics. Sometimes we often talk about dog training. So he's a very friendly guy. I do have one more question I'd like to ask. It is, I'm going to read it word for word, because I don't really understand the context of the question, but I do want to ask it because somebody has put it in the comments. This question is, what about all the unpaid labour women and carers do? How do we compensate those who contribute but aren't recognised? And
You mean like the mother at home?
I believe that is the context to what it's referring to.
You've muted again, Preston.
Sorry, I keep leaving my microphone unmuted. I'm supposed to be the experienced co-host here, but I would encourage the person who wrote that question to send Lachlan a message, because I'm sure he would love to chat about that more in depth. But me being the low IQ person that I am, I failed to understand the context of that question. So it's completely on me, but I believe that is what that question was referring to. But maybe that's a good question for you to have in a message, because I think with some more context, I think that's an entire conversation in itself. But did you want to put a short comment to
Yeah,
that?
I mean, just to add quickly, we've done a great disservice to the mothers. You know, I mean, I can only give you and say the most positive things about my mother, who read to me when I was growing up, who helped me do my homework, who packed my lunch every single day, who picked me up from school, who was there continuously throughout my childhood, my teenage years, and now even as an adult. I still ask my mum to read over my work, because not only do I want her to feel involved, I value what she is providing to me, which is that still giving me that support. And so it's not a bad thing to have mum stay at home. I think it's an incredibly admirable decision, and because they are raising the next generation to inherit the country. So the mother is passing on so many timeless values, cultures, and ways of thinking, usually mostly the mother, because the father is working. And so her role in society is of the utmost importance, and we really need to be proud of that, and proud that they can make any decision they want. But it is only to be admired, mums who stay home to raise a family. And just to add also on the question, you know, of course there's examples of individuals who need support outside the family, because the family is not a safe environment, and perhaps that's a place that the government does have a role. But again, you know, maybe the government has the role in connecting those individuals with the private institution that provides the services. It's just that when the government is taking our money and then deciding what to do with it, the problem is they just do a bad job. And so I want to find a way to get the money closer to the people who need it, and let individuals compete to give the best service, because only the free market and competition provides any reason to improve and grow.
Thank you so much, Lachlan Lade, number 2 Senate candidate for Queensland. Make sure you follow Lachlan. Make sure you send him a message. Talk about what's important to you in Australia. Also, we have Jim Wilmot in the space. I just want to recognise him quickly, number 1 Senate candidate for Queensland. So also make sure you follow Jim and talk to Lachlan, talk to Jim, talk about what matters to you, and hopefully they can both earn your vote at the next election. Lachlan, thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Paul now, but what an honour it is to talk to you once again. I love when you come in these spaces. I love how accessible you are. I love how accessible all libertarians are. So thank you so much, Lachlan, and I will hand it back to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Preston. And contrary to what you said earlier, certainly not at low IQ. Your contributions here and elsewhere are very valued I'm sure. So one thing that jumped out at me there, just in those exchanges, Lachlan, as you mentioned, 4 words: proud about the nation. And that really jumped out at me, and I think that's a good message to maybe finish up on. If we can find some sort of pride in what went before, despite its failings, and take that as something that we can cherish, a flame we can cup our hands around and gift that pride forward to the next generation. I think that's a fantastic positive message to end up on. And I'd really like to highlight the positive side of this discussion. For all our problems, I threw a lot at Lachlan here tonight, and they were just go-to, simple, basic things that we can start implementing. It's the typical engineering problem again. You don't solve the big problem all at once. You break it down into manageable bits, and that gives me reason to be hopeful. And I think we all have a moral obligation to be positive about the future, because our parents and grandparents were positive enough about their futures to raise us. And who are we not to pay that forward? So keep positive in everything that you do. So on that note, this has been a fantastic space. Despite the difficulties at the front, we still have this amazing opportunity to connect thinkers together and live. And we covered so much, from education to power, and I spent a fair bit of time on the family, and including grandparents, and the allocation of resources, and importantly, how we start educating people on the importance of choice. So I'd like to again thank yourself, Lachlan, and Preston. Lachlan, it's been such an engaging conversation, mate. I'm left feeling that if the world had more men like you, we'd find ourselves navigating far fewer problems. So thank you for what you're doing and standing up, and it's appreciated. And I'd love to give you the final word.
Yeah.
Just to talk about anything we might have missed.
Before we do give Lachlan the final word, I want to thank you, Paul, because it's great when we have new people starting to host spaces, and for you to come on, give us as Australians a platform to talk to our politicians. I think that's amazing work. So I want to thank you, Paul. It's incredible work you're doing. I look forward to the next one.
I humbly accept your praise. Thank you, Preston. Over to you, Lachlan.
Yeah, cheers, fellas, for holding this. It's always good to have a conversation and let us all talk as freely as we can. And so, yeah, as you sort of alluded to, all we do in our lives is for our children who will inherit the nation. That's really our only reason to working hard and building a better world, a better country, a better community. We always want to give our children the opportunities that we ourselves could never have. And let us all be bloody proud to be Australians, because what we've done together in this nation to build a completely unique nation in about 200 years, a nation that is, the envy of the world, well, we should all be incredibly proud. And I've got no time for those who think we were the evil colonizers, because this country's all it is because of us. So, yeah, no, it's exciting times. I really think that everything is moving in our favor. It will take time. Everything takes longer than you would want, but inevitably the dial is moving in our direction.
I got goosebumps, mate. Thank you very much again. Apologies for the difficulties in the space up front. And look, everyone, have a wonderful night. And I hope to connect with you all again soon. Thanks so much for joining.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.